Mhm. It is 12:04.
Over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Sarah Jones. I'm the treasurer for WALS Watershed Coalition, Inc. Today, we have some concerning things to talk about. And I've got the Suwannee River Creek Keeper, John S. Quarterman, here. He is a native to Suwannee River Basin. He lives in unincorporated Lowndes County, Georgia, on a few hundred acres of longleaf pine forest. It's beautiful. There he has lived for generations. His grandfather bought it in 1921. They have a cypress swamp and a creek that runs into the Withlacoochee River, which eventually runs into the Suwannee River. As a Suwannee River keeper, he has spent much of his time going to meetings and paddling rivers and photographing locations in North Florida and South Georgia. He spends even more time paddling a keyboard in advocacy, advocating for the rivers and streams and clean water, all the way down to the underground water, the aquifer, which we all drink from. We use it for agriculture, industry, household use. We all need clean water. John, let's talk about this Jacksonville thing. Over to you.
Alrighty then. Yeah, I just got back from Atlanta. I was up there for 2 days and they drink out of lakes. It's very strange.
Wow.
But down below the fall line in the coastal plain in Georgia, Florida, parts of South Carolina, Alabama, we drink out of the Floridan aquifer. But first, yep, I'm the Suwannee River Keeper. That's advocacy and the executive director. That's business. Walls Watershed Coalition, been around since 2012. 10,000 square miles of the Suwannee River Basin and estuary in Georgia and Florida. That's larger than any of 6 states and less population than any state. This is the WALS vision and mission, basically clean water. And that's the Floridan aquifer. Like she said, everything down here depends on it. You may know this man. That's Rick Davis. He's a Madison County, Florida county commissioner. He's also the chair of the River Task Force of a dozen downstream Florida counties. And he spoke at our gala last year. Sara, by the way, is the chair of the gala organizing committee, if y'all want to be on the committee. And he complimented Valdosta about all the more than 160 million it's spent on fixing its wastewater system. They're going to spend a lot more because it's a big problem. And he urged more water quality testing by Valdosta, which so far they haven't done. So the main point of this slide is, yes, we know about Valdosta sewage. We spend more time on Valdosta than anything else, including water quality testing. Sarah is also a water quality tester, and Gretchen, who's on here, is our water quality testing trainer. She can train you up too. Now, this is a word I keep trying to explain to Valdosta, but they don't seem to want to hear it. It's stigma, which is the effects of the wastewater spills are not just actual contamination of the water. Due to our water quality testing program, and we also look at Valdosta's own results, much of the time the Withlacoochee River is actually clean from E. coli, which is what we're mainly measuring. But that doesn't mean that people believe that it's clean. When anybody wants to go paddle, fish, swim, boat on any of the rivers in the Suwannee River Basin, the first thing that comes to their mind is, what about those Valdosta wastewater spills? Even for parts of the basin that are not downstream from Valdosta, basically the Suwannee River upstream from the Alapaha, the Ichetucknee River, the Santa Fe River, and the New River of the Santa Fe. But all 12 counties in Florida that are the same counties as in the Suwannee River Water Management District. They're on the task force because stigma, which is to say sewage reputation, it affects them all. Okay, so we know that the Suwannee River Basin is downstream from Valdossa's wastewater. Does it also need to be downstream from Jacksonville's wastewater? That's what we're really talking about here. Now, on the left here is the problem area that the districts think they're dealing with, which is Itchituttony River and the Santa Fe River and their springs. And on the right is their latest graphic of what they think they want to do with it, which is to pipe treated wastewater from Jacksonville into wetlands in the Suwannee Basin to recharge the aquifer and thus recharge the springs. And they say that increasing water demand is the problem. Well, yes, but what is projected to increase the most? Public supply. What does public supply mean? Well, it's not agriculture. Agriculture is the green bars, which you'll notice is projected to increase, but not as much as the big blue bar there at the bottom. That's public supply. And not as much as the other light blue bar is commercial, industrial, institutional, which includes things like mining and, yes, Nestle's water withdrawals for bottled water. And the others are domestic self-supply, in other words, your personal wells, the red, power generation is orange, and landscape and recreational is the purple. So by far the biggest is public supply. Where is this public supply? Oh, well, before we go to that, the black line is population. Notice that water supply is already not increasing as fast as population. And there are ways to make water supplies and water withdrawals from the Floridan aquifer, make that increase much less faster than population. Okay, where is this demand and where is this population? Well, it's the area of the North Florida Regional Water Supply Partnership. That's a thing that's been around since 2016. We've been complaining about it ever since. And it's much of the area, not all of the area, of the Suwannee and St. Johns River Water Management Districts. Here is the map of that area. And you notice on the west, it's bounded by the Suwannee River. So Madison, Lafayette, Dixie counties are not part of it, nor is Levy County to the south. And it includes, oh, here comes Rick Lanise, who's the president of our Santa Fe River. Okay, so what's the biggest population center in this entire area in this map? Hint, the biggest city in Florida, Jacksonville. There is the real problem. This is a map from that North Florida Regional Water Supply Program. And you'll notice over where Jacksonville is, there's a yellow area. That actually means increase in levels in the upper Floridan aquifer. Why is it increasing around Jacksonville? Because they're withdrawing so much water, it's pulling water from elsewhere, including from over at the Itchituttony and the Santa Fe. Okay, so here again is what they want to fix. And it's a real problem. I think everyone can see by personal observation and lots of gauges, lower levels and flows in the springs and rivers, specifically in the Itchituttony, Santa Fe, and associated springs. And Suwannee River Water Management District's way of dealing with that has mostly been, well, they just keep decreasing the minimum flows and levels. I think even there is starting to realize they can't really do that much more. Okay, now this is tables that came out of the St. John's River Water Management District agenda from, I think this was November. In the Suwannee River Basin, this is according to withdrawal impacts, which I believe is according to what they measured and gauges in the affected area. How exactly they know which is Suwannee and which is St. John's, I'm not entirely sure. But anyway, this is according to the two districts' own data. In the Suwannee district, not surprisingly, the biggest users are agricultural. Nobody's surprised by that. You've all seen the center pivots running. And there are ways to decrease that. For example, center pivots that just spray out the ends over roads. I mean, that needs to be fixed. And there's been much discussion at the Suwannee River Water Management District Board about, okay, if they have to go to a phase 2 drought advisory, which includes regulatory requirements, they can require irrigation only at night, which means there'll be less evapotranspiration because it won't be as warm. Okay, so yeah, there are ways to decrease agricultural water use, but look at the bottom here, and their public supply accounts for 23 to 32% from the St. John's River Water Management District. And that's very largely Jacksonville, Duval County, which of course is the same thing by government. Here's that map again, their latest map. Why is this a solution? We will go into, you notice much of this is phrased as questions because I don't have most of the answers. Now, somewhat surprisingly, the districts don't seem to have the answers either, which in itself I consider a problem. Why are they plowing ahead with this when they don't know the answers to many of these things? Well, here's one that really puzzles me. Why did the St. John's River Water Management District on November 12th, why did their board approve hiring a consultant for a project that's supposed to benefit springs and rivers in the Suwannee River Water Management District? To the tune of $2.17 million, they hired a consultant for 3 years to look into a bunch of this stuff. Okay, what are they looking into? This is from a staff presentation in the Suwannee District in July. This is a general overview. Multidimensional problem, multiple potential sources of water and potential delivery methods. Delivery method is euphemism for pipeline. Okay, and I did blow up that table on the right about comparative process to select projects, but that's not that relevant right now. Cooperative funding agreement with the two districts, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection and 4 Northeast Florida utilities. The total cost, by the way, according to the district staff, is $1 billion with a B. As somebody pointed out in a recent meeting where I gave this presentation, that's the current cost, not counting inflation and cost overruns. We can pretty much confidently say it'll end up being way more than $1 billion if this thing happens. Okay, which 4 Northeast Florida utilities and how much from each? How much will customer rates rise? And how much from the two districts and FDEP? And how much will that cause taxes to rise? Nobody seems to know the answer to that. Although, in fact, we do know part of the answer. Because also in November, JEA, which provides water for Jacksonville, Duval County, and parts of surrounding counties, approved $400 million for this Water First North Florida project. That's 40% of that $1 billion. Now, here's an interesting paragraph. According to JEA, because the lower Santa Fe and Itchtuckney rivers have not met these minimum flows and levels, the region has created Water First as its solution. Who is this, the region? Any of you in Florida remember voting for this project? You remember voting for any candidate for office who said they were for this project? I haven't seen anybody raising their hand to those questions. So who is this, the region? Sure looks like the region may be JA. And why should the Suwannee Basin provide wetlands for further purification of Jacksonville wastewater? That is a phrase that they and the two districts use, further purification, as in the purification by the wastewater plant is not sufficient. The main plant that's being targeted is JEA's Buckman plant, which is in Jacksonville. That's a picture of it. This information came from News4Jax. You can see it online. This particular WWALS post has been shared many, many places. I probably should integrate it into these slides. You can, at any point, put questions in the chat. If you think it's really urgent, you can go ahead and ask, and there will be Q&A at the end. Okay, this is another slide from back in July. Notice this is a more detailed map. Now, silly me, I figured, okay, well, they got a pretty good idea of where these wetlands are going to be. So I sent in an open records request for, can we have the GPS coordinates and the names of these wetlands? The response from the Suwannee district was, well, that's merely a conceptual map and we don't know. I have some doubt about that because some of these are remarkably precise. The most northerly one, that is on a pond in the phosphate mine in Hamilton County. It's a pond at the top of Swift Creek, which, by the way, had a big fish kill only a few months ago. The one south of Lake City is right near a place where personnel wearing Suwannee and St. John's River Water Management District clothing we're seeing going in and out recently. And the other two locations match with known wetlands. So I'm a little dubious that they don't already have a pretty good idea where they want these things to be. Okay, so how long is this thing supposed to take? At least a dozen years before they start it up. So at least there's some time to try to stop it first. Now, don't get me wrong. If we get great answers to all this, maybe the JEA Buckman plant really is cleaning up all this stuff, and there's some reason to believe the pipeline will never break and so on and so forth, then maybe it's a good idea. But without answers to a lot of questions, I don't see why we should believe that. So what's going on in the first 3 years? Remember, the consultant that was hired, certainly one thing they're doing is siting investigation. Maybe they're looking at other wetlands. I don't know. And routing study. That's 60 miles just to get over into the Suwannee Basin. And then there's got to be other pipelines. Where do those go? And then there's other stuff. Okay, so where is this route? Are they going to have to use eminent domain to get part of this route? What about land values nearby? Remember stigma. It's a wastewater plant. Treated wastewater, okay, but it's still a wastewater pipe. What's that going to do to nearby land values? And what are the risks to drinking water wells, agriculture, industry, and recreation in springs and rivers? Remember, tourism is Florida's biggest industry. And for many of the Florida counties in the Suwannee River Basin, the rivers are their main source of tourism. Okay, this is another slide from July. And silly me, around about December, I thought, well, they must have much of this. So I sent in an open records request for the pilot study, the wetland site assessment, and the RFQ. And they, of course, said, well, we don't have the site assessment or the pilot study. Turns out that's what the contractor was hired for, which they didn't tell me. I found by rummaging around on the St. John's District website. They did send me the RFQ, which has some interesting information. Okay. And also over on the St. John's District agenda for that November meeting, it's very clear that the decision on hiring the contractor was done by the St. John's staff and board. There is an advisory committee, a non-voting advisory committee consisting of JEA, GRU for Gainesville, Clay Utilities, St. John's Utilities, and the Suwannee River Water Management District. Why is the Suwannee District just a non-voting member on the same level as wastewater utilities? It seems very odd to me. And of course, even bigger thing, where is the evidence that the source wastewater plant or plants, we heard from the Suwannee District at a recent meeting, there are other plants thinking of joining in on this. Where is the evidence that those plants will remove PFAS forever chemicals, drugs, and artificial sweeteners? Now we know that wastewater plants don't remove all those, because after the notorious December 2019 Valdosta wastewater spill, I'm trying to stop myself from going on about that. FDAP was actually testing for all these things on the Withlacoochee, Alapaha, and Suwannee rivers because Marilee Malwitz Gibson and I had nagged them into doing it. And while the untreated wastewater was coming down, all these things were definitely detected. And even after that all washed through, some of them were still detected in traces. The FDAP wasn't actually checking for PFAS, but WWALS a couple of years ago, in participation with many other riverkeepers throughout the U.S. and a Waterkeeper Alliance project, did check for PFAS, and that's definitely in the Withlacoochee River. Now, compared to many other rivers, it's not very high. And fortunately, it's not significantly higher below the outflow from the Valdosta Withlacoochee wastewater plant than above it. And also ditto for the paper mill near Lake Park. So we're relatively fortunate in that. But remember, Jacksonville is way bigger than Valdosta. Valdosta has like 55,000 people. Jacksonville has more than 1 million. So one could expect a lot more PFAS still in their wastewater. And why should we believe that the Buckman plant or the other plants will never fail, or the pipe itself? Why should we believe that they're never going to fail, even though Valdosta's wastewater system, much smaller, has repeatedly failed in many different ways? All right, here's something that the district's going to have to deal with, both districts eventually. This slide was presented by University of Florida researchers in December at the district board meeting, Suwannee District. It's a NASA slide, the 10 most recent years of warmest on record. And yes, that includes through apparently 2022. Okay, so one of the Suwannee District board members piped up and said, yes, so eventually we're going to have to limit water withdrawals. Maybe think about that now instead of having to do it abruptly later. And he even said, as in not issuing as many water withdrawal permits or permits for less water. He even got the executive director and the presenter to say the word water withdrawals, but they clearly did not like associating it with limits. What those researchers were presenting had to do with dairy cows. It turns out the problem is already bad enough that dairy cows in the Suwannee Basin don't produce milk like they should unless they're doused with water to cool them down. What the researchers were presenting is a sophisticated way to only douse the cows when they're already measured to be overheating. The problem is already that bad and it's getting worse. Okay, so you wouldn't have to have a 60-mile plus pipeline if you just limited withdrawals. And we know by what staff have said in Suwannee District meetings that all the permits issued by the districts include clauses that saying under certain conditions, the permittee has to limit withdrawals. Those come in with phase 2, 3, and 4 water shortage advisories. The district in January, the Suwannee district went to a phase 1 advisory, which is purely voluntary. But they had discussion that probably within 2 or 3 months, unless a miracle occurs and so much rain that the drought abates, they're probably going to have to go to a phase 2, which does have some mandatory requirements. And the bottom part's the stuff about eventually limit permits issued. Here's something you can do in the Suwannee Basin. Dennis J. Price, a longtime WWALS member, former board member, he recommended this back in 2016. He's a practicing geologist out of Hamilton County, which, as everybody knows, in addition to row crops, there's a lot of agriculture, a lot of forestry in the Suwannee Basin. And most of the planted pines are done on beds with ditches between them. Water runs down the ditches. And his thought is there's usually wetlands at the bottom of the ditches. Why not put wells at the overflows of the wetlands to replenish the aquifer? Now, I've heard a couple of objections. Apparently, when he first raised this, he was told US EPA won't permit it because water's not run through a treatment plant first. But riddle me this, why would these wetlands not be cleaner than the wetlands with the treated wastewater from Jacksonville? Now, one answer to that is, what about pesticides used in the forestry? Well, there's a way to grow pine trees that everybody who does it knows that doesn't require spraying after you plant them, which is very simple. You burn. You do prescribed burns every 2 to 3 years. This is well known. Now, the objection to that is then you can't do raking pine straw for income. Okay, what if the districts made a deal that they paid what the landowner would get for raking pine straw not to do that so that they could do these wells instead? I bet that would cost way less than $1 billion. But this plan was not even considered when they ended up with Water First North Florida. Once again, remember, the biggest problem is not agriculture, including forestry. That's the biggest water users in the Suwannee Basin, but the biggest in the subject area is Jacksonville. Okay, so if Jacksonville's wastewater is treated so well it can be piped into the Suwannee River Basin, why not just feed it back into Jacksonville's drinking water? Oh, it's not treated that well? Then why is it safe to send over to the Suwannee Basin where it's going to go into the aquifer, which we drink out of? Okay, and if people don't want to drink it in the Jacksonville area, how about use it for golf courses, data center, and other industrial uses? That doesn't seem to have been considered, and this certainly wasn't considered. This was brought up by another Suwannee District board member, and I looked into it a bit. Now, his points were pretty simple. The water need is mostly on the coast of Florida, because that's where the big cities are. Well, there's Orlando, but there's always an exception. And desalination is cheaper, and it certainly can be used to flush toilets and wash cars. Well, it turns out that ain't all it can be used for. Now, the district keeps saying it's expensive. Well, Ken Sulak, who's retired from USGS at the meeting I spoke at recently in Live Oak, he piped up and said he knows about 100 million gallon a day desalination project that costs $1.1 billion. Water First North Florida is only 40 million gallons a day for 1 billion. Do the arithmetic. Desalination is less expensive. Okay, and why can Texas, Arizona, and California do it? And for drinking water, not just gray water, why can't Florida do it? Here are some examples. Don't worry if you can't read all this. The slides will be available so you can download them. In Texas, there is a 100 million gallon day project for drinking water for people on the Gulf Coast of Texas. In Arizona, the Water Board has approved desalination plants in California and Mexico, trading that water for Colorado River allocations. Sounds awful similar to the problem with the Ichetucknee and Santa Fe rivers. In California, a new project in 2025. It's small, it's only 15 million gallons, but will fortify resilience against future droughts and changing climate and emergencies. Sounds very similar to issues brought up at the Suwannee District Board. And then there's three more that have been around since 2015, one of them for 50 million gallons a day. This is not rocket science. It's not new. It's well known. There's a new one on the Monterey Peninsula in 2025, and it's worth pointing out, not all these proposals get approved. One at Huntington Beach was rejected in 2022 for environmental reasons. Desalination isn't perfect. Not every plan needs to be approved. And it turns out Florida has more desalination plants than any other state. That's right, Florida. For example, Tampa Bay has been doing this since 2007, 25 million gallons a day. I don't think it was actually doing that much to start with, but it is now. And this typo here at the bottom, it should say South Florida Water Management District. The F and the W are transposed. Has numerous facilities totaling in 2023 up to 292 million gallons per day, which brings up another point. You don't have to have one huge project. You can have a bunch of little projects that add up, which also means you can do them faster. And you can add to them as this population and demand increases. One of the most recent opened in May 2025. It's small, only 4 million gallons, but it's for Key West. I mean, how much can they use? That was opened by the governor. So the Florida governor not only knows about this, he approves of desalination. Okay, so why not desalinate enough to eliminate Jacksonville's water withdrawals from the aquifer? Remember, Water First North Florida is only 40 million gallons per day. It'd take more than a dozen years to build. Doesn't take that long. And, you know, it sends the Jacksonville wastewater to the Suwannee Basin. Okay, it's treated, but it needs to be further purified in wetlands in the Suwannee Basin. And who's ever seen an engineering project that big that never fails? Okay, desalination could be distributed, could add up to all 120 million gallons a day that JEA says is used in its entire drinking water service areas. How about if we solve the problem instead of papering over it with a humongous billion-dollar pipeline project? So those are some questions I recommend everyone in Florida, and you know, if you're not even in Florida, you might be interested in these questions, because remember, it's the same aquifer that Georgia drinks out of. I mean, I'm only 30 miles from the Georgia-Florida state line. Yes, yes, Floridians, the Suwannee Riverkeeper lives in Georgia, but believe me, I spent a lot of time in Florida. So here's some, to contact the district boards, but don't stop with them. Contact members of Congress and of the State House and county commissioners, and I guess I need to add on here, and city councils, and of course that Florida County's task force. And get them to, at the very least, ask questions. And one would hope some of them would actually say, this is a bad idea, don't do it. And here we have contact information. Also on the WWALS website, there's a change.org petition if you want to sign on to that. And the Zoom recording for this will be on the WWALS website in a few days. So that's mostly what I have to say about that. What do we got for questions?
We do have some questions in the chat already. If you guys want to unmute and ask them yourselves.
You could prompt people, whoever put stuff in the chat.
Let's see. Try to pull it up here. Okay. Let's start with Dylan has a question.
You want to ask it, Dylan? Well, if he's shy, you could ask it for him.
Dylan asks, has JEA committed to the 40% of of the cost all in of the cost in the project? Have they committed to it yet?
Well, their board voted on it on November 18th, 2025. So that sounds like commitment to me.
Okay.
All right, that's the thing that's not on there. But yes, they voted on it on November 18th, 2025. It appears that they have committed $400 million to this project.
Wow. Next, we have Haley Hall.
She'll probably
Haley,
speak for herself.
would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, so I am concerned that they're saying that this is for, it's for the Ichetucknee Santa Fe MFLs, but if they're not meeting the 0.35 limit for the nitrates, then it's not springs restoration. And so that ruins the whole thing. Whenever at the meeting in Live Oak, when I asked the district representative about what water quality monitoring was going to be done and what water quality standards were going to be met, he was very vague and mentioned that similar projects are able to get the wastewater down to about 1 or sometimes less than 1 milligrams per liter of nitrate. But for outstanding Florida Springs, which that's what this project is for, it has to be 0.35. And so I don't understand how that doesn't, cross the thing out from the beginning.
That's a very good question. And how does this fit with the basin management action plans that all the water management districts are supposedly doing, which is supposed to, decrease the nitrates leaching through the soil, mostly from agricultural fertilizer into the springs and rivers? How is adding more nitrates from this project going to help that? I see Joe Squiteri has joined us. Joe, you had some interesting questions at a Valdosta meeting with that downstream counties task force. Some of those might apply to this project.
Well, so I went through Zoom and it just put me in waiting, so I re-registered and rejoined. So I apologize. Um, so I was looking at the Buckman files, and it's really disturbing that this plant is under a consent order from DEP for not meeting their toxicity standards, not meeting cyanide standards, nickel standards, iron standards. I forgot what else, but I ran Aldrin, fecal coliform. It's a terrible plant, and just running looking at their own reports. I heard you guys talking about the nitrates and the nitrites. This plant discharges 51,000 pounds of total nitrogen a month. It also discharges over 47,000 pounds of phosphorus. It also discharges 23,000 pounds a month of BOD and 42,000 pounds a month of TSS. This is a very basic secondary treatment wastewater treatment plant. It doesn't meet any kind of nutrient removal. And like I said, it doesn't even meet their limits half the time for all those parameters that I mentioned. So, I mean, I could probably calculate what their nitrite is if I saw some of their reports, but it's unfathomable to me that they think that they could discharge this water, whatever their plan is, through the wetlands and meet surface water standards. Particularly when they said they told DEP 3 or 4 years ago that they were going to inject all their wastewater through underground injection control wells. Because they passed, state of Florida passed a rule that said all all surface water discharges that weren't beneficial reuse had to be eliminated by 2032. And they had to submit a report every year saying how they were going to meet that deadline. And the last report I could find was they were going to build 15 UIC wells and inject all the water.
Why do I smell a smoking gun? They can claim that this project is their beneficial reuse.
Yeah, I think that's how they're going to frame it. But yeah, it's to their benefit, but it's
Uh-huh.
certainly not to the river's benefit.
Yeah, it's not to the benefit of the Suwannee Basin.
That is for sure.
Did you find this stuff through EPA Echo, or did you actually successfully dig it out of Oculus?
Oculus and the enterprise information portal.
Okay, if you could send whatever part of that that you feel you want to wallswatershed@gmail.com, I'll start publishing some of it.
Yeah, whatever you want. I've got their monthly report. I've got their annual report. I did some other calculations on how much they discharge a pound in nickel a year into the water.
Clean, huh? Yeah.
But whatever you want, I can send you some calculations that I did what their discharges are. But it's a terrible plant, really terrible plant.
hmm Um,
But yeah, I've got their consent order.
mhm.
I've got their monitoring reports.
I
We've
was
got
betting there'd be a consent order. It was on my to-do list to deal with it.
yeah.
As a river keeper, I get pulled this way and that. I spent the last 2 days in Atlanta dealing with Okefenokee swamp issues, for example, and now I got to deal with a data center proposed near Irwinville, Georgia. And let's not talk right now about the detention center proposed for Stark, Florida. How's that a water problem? Stark, adding a detention center would increase the population by 50%. How can its wastewater facilities deal with that?
Yeah, the Water Environment Federation is putting on a seminar on the February 18th about how to deal with data centers. I'm not gonna be able to join it because I'll be out out of pocket. But I don't know if you can hook up into that to see what they're saying about data centers.
Now, send me a pointer to that.
All right.
Rick Lanise wants to tell us what Suwannee River Water Management District said recently. Let us know, Rick, what went on?
Afternoon, everyone. Yes, well, we had Amy Brown at the meeting yesterday, and Troy Roberts was the one specifically. He's in charge of communication and outreach.
Mm-hmm.
So he didn't have a whole lot of answers to questions, but
Mm-hmm.
one of the things I thought interesting was they don't call it treated wastewater, they now call it reclaimed water.
Yes.
So once it goes through the wetlands, they want to call it reclaimed water. A couple of things yesterday that were very interesting to me is number one, have you all heard of Senate Rule 64?
I probably should have. Tell us about it.
Well, Senate Rule 64, one of the provisions in that Senate rule was focusing on eliminating non-beneficial surface water discharge of treated wastewater by 2032 into rivers. So this project is a combination of regional issues, as you mentioned earlier, in that it's solving a problem that they're not going to be allowed to discharge their wastewater into the St. John's anymore by 2032 by Senate rule. So uh, that's one of the reasons for this project. I'm sure of it. Not that, and then they go, well, maybe we can solve another problem, the minimum flows and levels for the lower Santa Fe and Itchtuckney by pumping, 40 million gallons a day of reclaimed water into that. But from what I got from the questions, the answers that they provided basically is this is going to be a test as we go kind of thing.
Hmm.
Somebody asked regarding the quality of the wastewater, the reclaimed water, in specifically in regards to nitrates, um, pharmaceuticals, PFAS. One of the answers from the crowd, and there were um, a lot of very astute people in the crowd, including Bob Palmer and Bob Knight. Um, I heard that 80 to 90% of the PFAS and pharmaceuticals are removed through the wastewater. I mean, through the ponds, the treated pond end up cleaning 80 to 90% of these chemicals.
Which probably
Um,
means it's left in the wetlands. How does that help us?
well, that's very interesting that you bring that up because that was a point of conversation. So the plants in the wetlands in particular have lots of contaminants in them, which isn't good for the animals that are eating the plants. And also, those plants eventually obviously die and decay. And now
Mhm.
you've got these contaminants in the soil or
It,
in the muck
it-
at the
and
bottom of the.
it's also not good for the animals that eat the and then for the hunters that eat the animals. So anyway, sorry, don't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
Right, exactly. Now, what I mean by this is going to be a test project as they move forward. Right now, they have a couple of sample facilities going on where one, they're introducing ozone
Mhm.
into the water. And they're thinking that this pre-treatment phase potentially will break down the contaminants better so that it can be absorbed by the wetland, more than the 80 to 90%. Um, but all the questions we're going to test. We're going to do a lot of testing. We're going to, and this is going to take years to do this to see if they can get this stuff clean enough to pump into the aquifer. You know, the nitrate level was brought up. Right now, the nitrate level is too high to pump into the basin. I mean, it's above 0.35. So this stuff has to be below that. I mean, based on their own rules. So they're hoping that they can come up with enough science between now and I think their target date is what, 2040 for this project completion. I think
Yeah.
that's the kind of their target is 2040. So they're going to do an awful lot of testing and an awful lot of money spent trying to get this water cleaned. Um, right now, I'm in Tampa area, and the Apollo Beach desal plant, which you all guys have mentioned, originally cost 158 million dollars. That,
Mhm.
of course, that was many years ago, and it's a lot higher now. But so for that price of 158 million, we're getting a lot of drinking quality water out of that desal plant. Now that's kind of unusual because the water that is they're using at that desal plant is coming right out of the Tico electric plant. So I don't know if that
Mhm.
has any impact and it makes it easier to process through that desal plant. But originally the desal plant had all kind of problems with their filters were clogging up because the water's coming from Tampa Bay. It isn't coming from the Gulf, and it has an awful lot of sediment in it coming from an estuary bay like Tampa Bay. But they figured that out, and they're actually talking about an expansion of that plant. I think it's roughly $500 million that will supply another bunch of water. For it, right now, it's supplying 10% of the drinking water in our area, which is obviously a huge help. Yesterday, somebody brought up, you know, why didn't we consider desal plants? And they basically said it's just too expensive. Uh, you know, $1.1 billion for less water. I don't know where you got the figure. And Sulak was there. Ken was there at the meeting too yesterday. But you know, they could not address any of the detailed questions. Basically saying it's going to all be tested and worked out before the product is pumped into the Santa Fe.
And then a miracle happens.
Right, right. So we'll see, I guess. But it wasn't very informative as it ended up because they couldn't really address any questions.
Oh yeah, Troy Roberts is who I should probably point out this is a nonpartisan issue because by request I presented at the Suwannee County Democratic Party and the Suwannee County Republican Party. That was a recent meeting, the last one that Haley was also at. And Troy Roberts also presented at that one. Amy Brown, as I'm sure you know, is the water program manager at the Suwannee District. She's the one that did that presentation in July, the slides I've been using.
Yeah,
So
she had a
she
lot of
really,
information on the phase one, phase two, phase
Mhm.
three, and then the emergency, I think, is the fourth phase is,
Mhm.
and the next phase, I believe, phase two is very limited regulatory changes, like watering once a week rather than twice and things of that nature.
Mhm.
Um, so it's going to take a while before we get down to the levels that require these regulatory changes, which really concerns me. I mean, I'm on a well, and from what I understand, looking at some of the charts, we are not quite to where we were in 2011, 2012, which was that horrible year of drought, and the Santa Fe stopped flowing almost entirely, from what I understand. I wasn't on the river
Mhm.
at the time, but we're quickly approaching that. And with 4 months of dry season left, like you said, John, unless we get a miracle, and it is supposed to rain Sunday, I'm crossing my fingers we get more than, a quarter inch. But like these last cold fronts really haven't been very satisfaction with water. I hope we get an inch or more. That'd be great.
The discussion in the Suwannee District Board meetings is basically it's going to take hurricanes to actually replenish the supply. Um, Thanks for all that. We got at least one more who wants to say something. Angela?
We have two Angelos on the chat.
Angela Tanner, I think it is.
I think we skipped Angela Whitman's.
Okay, we'll start with her. Angela Wyman?
Okay, my question was if we're pulling too much water, then couldn't they have a moratorium to stop the building and the growth?
Well, the districts can't stop building. What they could do is stop approving so many water withdrawal permits. But given that much of the growth is in Jacksonville, that's coming from the, remember, public supply, which means that would require less withdrawal or at least no increased withdrawal by Jacksonville, which would be a St. Johns River Water Management District issue, or Jacksonville itself would have to do that. Or I suppose the state could pass a law. So theoretically, it could happen.
Yeah. So that was my question.
Or at the very least, they could require a much more efficient use of water. It's naturally politics. They, as in the St. Johns District or Jacksonville, Duval County City, or the state have to be convinced to do that.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure how that worked. So I will thank you for clearing it up for me.
Yeah, and Rick, I understand there's some issues about how much does desalination really cost and where does the water come from. But, there's plenty of projects that demonstrate it can be done in multiple states, including Florida. So it's very curious there's not more investigation going into this.
Well, I I think you're exactly right. I think more investigation should have gone into that. But Angela's comment about stopping development, essentially, that's what needs to happen. Of course, that's not going to happen in the state of Florida. But one of the issues that is just blaring to me is that we're talking about 40 million gallons a day into the Santa Fe Basin that is going to eventually help with minimum flows. Okay. Many experts already say we're way more than 40 million gallons behind anyways to increase flows to where we need them. But I can guarantee you this does not take rocket science. If they keep issuing permits between now and 2040, which they will, 40 million gallons a day isn't even going to begin to help minimum flows. It's a drop in the bucket without reducing the amount of permits issued, and reducing the quantity of permits that already have been issued. They're never going to solve the minimum flow problems that we have.
I think one reason for the 40 million gallons is the JEA Buckman plant is supposed to handle 52.5 million gallons a day. It can't really scale up to handle the real problem. We have another question from the other Angela Tanner. You still on here, Angela? Yes, you are, Angela Tanner. Well, Sarah, if she doesn't want to speak it, you could.
Okay. Let's see if I can pull it up. Okay. Angela says, I'm located within 10 miles of the Suwannee River, and my well water comes from an artesian spring. We've got to protect ourselves from this happening. I'm having a hard time reading it. Fisheries test these river fish yearly at a minimum and would be a good reference of existing water pollution. Last year, PFAS, I can't say that.
Forever chemicals.
Yeah, forever chemicals. That's what I usually call them. Was already confirmed in our river fish above 5%. Lake City area is rapidly growing in population. If we allow this water from Jacksonville to happen, where are we going to when our region develops the same need? The request project should not even be a consideration, no matter what kind of money kick is offered. And I agree with that, actually. Who is really profiting from this?
Yeah, that's a big question that was asked at the most recent meeting in Live Oak. Who profits from it? Some of it's obvious, whoever builds the wetlands, whoever builds the pipeline. And from what we heard from Joe, apparently JEA, because they're required to stop letting their output go into the St. Johns River, so they get another way to send their wastewater. But how does the Suwannee River Basin profit? Allegedly by doing something to help with the levels and flows in the Ichitutney, Santa Fe rivers and springs. But you've all heard all the issues about with what contaminants, and if the wetlands are supposed to purify it, what gets left in the wetlands? And I, for one, am not happy with, they're gonna test and come up with answers within 10 or more years. Well, meanwhile, sinking a whole bunch of money into this, so then they'll start saying, well, we put all this money into it, how can we stop now? That's just my opinion. What do y'all think?
I think we're all in trouble.
Well, please, if you want this to stop, contact your water management district, your city council, your county commission, your state representatives and senators, and your U.S. Congress members. And talk to the press as well. We haven't got much press coverage yet. There was supposed to be a story that came out of that most recent meeting in Live Oak. I haven't seen it yet. A lot of people are saying it's a done deal. You can't stop it. That's what is always said about anything like this. And not everything happens. The Cross Florida Barge Canal is the prime example. That had the full weight of the federal government and the Florida government, and it didn't happen. Of course, there's side effects still going on. We all know about the dam and which fortunately is in St. John's Basin, so I mostly don't have to deal with it. So anyway, just because people claim it's a done deal doesn't mean it can't be stopped. Is it going to be easy? Probably not. And I understand some people don't actually want to take a stand against it yet, but from what I've seen, and I've heard no one on the WWALS board say otherwise, I suppose we could have an actual vote. WWALS and Suwannee Riverkeeper are opposed to this project and will continue doing what we can to stop it. The first thing is keep asking these questions. And if there are no answers forthcoming to these questions, especially in the light of things like what Joe has revealed, that we know one big beneficiary at this point, that's JEA, to get around requirements by the state, why should the Suwannee Basin be the sacrificed zone to benefit JEA? If somebody can answer me that question, I'd be all ears.
Looks like Haley Hall has a few more comments. Haley, do you want to unmute and discuss?
Yeah, so for them to be saying it's for springs restoration, if they're not meeting that 0.35, which they are not going to, it's even though this is already, everything's, in beginning phases, we don't know what's going on, that's already clear. They won't be able to make the 0.35. And so that, it's really just the branding of it for them and for them to check that box that they're meeting the MFL rather than actually meeting it in a meaningful way. And so the waste needs to go somewhere else. And so I think that we should maybe have another call about this in about a month or so. Just to see what can happen in the meantime, keep talking to more people about it, and trying to bring more people into this. Because, people in Suwannee County are really latching onto it. That meeting was packed, and I think we're seeing a lot of people who normally aren't interested in water issues are really latching on to this. And I just think we need to, keep talking about it.
Yeah, we can do that, especially if we have additional help on the events committee by then.
Well, I'd be happy to help.
There you go. Rick, were there a lot of people at the meeting in Alachua or nearby Alachua County?
Yes, it wasn't to capacity, but that's a really large room. We were at the IFAS location in Newberry, which is a large building. But there was presentations, some really good presentations. The one by Amy Brown was on the hydraulic conditions and the review of the district's water shortage process, and then the very interesting discussion on enhancing water yield through forest management. That was really cool. UF Water Institute. And then Troy Roberts from Suwannee River talked about the Florida First Project. And then we had a discussion on Reunite the Rivers from Florida Defenders of the Environment. And then Bob Knight presented his paper on the dairy and how much the dairy farms in North Florida are contributing nitrates to the ecosystem.
That's a big problem. He sent me that paper. I have to do something to help promote that. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, that's amazing because if you did something about those dairy farms that are producing that much nitrate, it would really be a large impact for a fairly small cost if you bought out those farms and put them somewhere else. the impact on nitrates would be dramatic, and it would be really quick. So that's why that paper was, I thought, really important, and for the people in Tallahassee to understand. Talk about money. They're here. They're going to spend $1 billion to do this in 15 years, and it's a big maybe. And here is some concrete things you can do to help the rivers. Not so much minimum flows; it wouldn't help in that regard, but the B maps, it would help in that regard quite a bit.
Yeah. As far as the drought stuff, I put a link here in the chat. If you follow that, you'll see Amy Brown's December presentation at the drought workshop, which includes the slides about the various levels, 1, 2, 3, 4, and graphs of drought conditions over time, including, as you mentioned, 2012. So if you want more about that, it's in there. I wish the district, they video their own meetings, which is a great relief. They didn't used to get anything on YouTube until I went, except when I went down there and stood in the corner with a video camera that people tripped over and then put it on YouTube. They do it themselves now, which is great. But if somebody's doing a presentation, they just show the presentation screen. They don't even show who's speaking on the district board. So there's room for improvement. And the link that I just sent, I was there. I took pictures so you can see who was speaking. Okay, so anyway, there is a huge amount of interest in this. The Water First North Florida. Apparently, almost nobody knew anything about it until WWALS started posting about it back in July. And I have been astonished at how much interest there is. And by interest, almost nobody is in favor of it. Yes, I know there's some people who want more information first before forming an opinion. I understand that, which is slightly different from my opinion that I don't understand how they're proceeding with this without answers to a lot of these questions. The precautionary principle, basically, first do no harm. They don't know they're not going to do harm. Why are they doing this? Okay, so my point is the public response to this is almost universally negative. Do you also remember I think it was only last year, there was a proposal to put golf courses and pickleball courts in state parks. That was a done deal. Well, it got undone by outcry all over the state of Florida. And in fact, the legislature ended up passing a law saying you can't do that. So this thing can be undone, and we need all that public outcry to make it happen, or to make the project not happen. We got anybody else wants to say anything on this particular call?
Hey, John, Joe Squitieri again. If you want to get some sort of an estimate of cost, Hillsborough County is building their new one water plant. It's a 30 million gallon a day reclaimed water plant. The cost right now is $1.3 billion. So there's a lot of money involved with this type of project. I mean, just the pipeline alone from Jacksonville all the way west it's a between right of way acquisition or eminent domain acquisition, the cost of the land, the cost of it's a phenomenally hugely expensive project. And 10 years from now or 5 years from now, it'll be even more expensive.
Right. The $1 billion was Amy Brown. I think this was way back in July, apparently off the top of her head, rough estimate. But it's not at all clear that includes, as you mentioned, does it include the pipeline?
Yeah.
Does it include acquiring land, buying it or going through the eminent domain process? Does it include test stations at the alleged wetlands? What does it include? We don't know. And I bet if I were to send in another open records request asking that, I give you long odds the answer would be, we don't know. That's why we hired a consultant. And the consultant isn't even going to do most of this because remember, there's several other phases, which is going to take at least 10 or 11 years. which incidentally blows past the 7-year deadline for JEA to not put stuff into the river anymore. So I guess they could say, we're working on it, give us a little more time. I'm not really for giving them more time. They need to find some other way to do this. If they can purify it so great, it's good enough to put back into the aquifer, which we all drink from. Why not put it into wetlands in the St. John's River Basin, and then use the purified result for drinking water for Jacksonville? Why not? Or if it's then so purified, maybe then it meets state standards for putting into the St. John's River.
Yeah, doesn't pass the beneficial reuse requirement. You know, that just what Rick was talking about, that 2032 deadline. If it's not beneficial to be discharged by state law, you know, it's 403-08064, it's got to be eliminated.
Mm-hmm. And just calling it reclaimed water doesn't mean it's really that clean.
No. No.
Yep.
The only break they got is if they reuse 70% under the apricot law, they could discharge 30% during the rainy season.
Mhm.
But that doesn't get rid of, you know, and the Buckman plant doesn't really produce any reclaimed water because it doesn't meet the standards for that water to go on golf courses or public access land.
Not
It's-
even good enough for golf courses.
It's not, it's a secondary basic plant.
That's why they need additional purification
They need a lot of additional purification, a lot.
through wetlands, which means a lot of it gets left in the wetlands, affecting
Yeah.
everything else, as I think Rick was pointing out.
Yeah.
Well, one of the big questions I had that I didn't get to ask because I knew there weren't going to be any answers, but the pipeline itself from the wetlands to our basin, where does it go? How do you have a plan for that yet? And I think the plan for that is not even close to finished yet. I heard some talk in the room about having to pipe it a lot shorter distance than most people think. So how the hydrology works, how it gets into the aquifer by only pumping a short distance, I'm not sure how that works. I mean, are we talking deep water injection? I don't know. I don't think they know, but I think the costs can go extremely way higher than $1 billion if they do have to start buying land for the pipe.
Mhm.
So I think they're looking at a shorter distance. I don't think that's public knowledge, and they won't share that with anybody. But I'd love to know the hydrology involved in this plan.
Well, according to them, if you remember this slide, they don't know where the pipe will go or where the wetlands will be. Preliminary siting and routing is what the consultant's working on for the first 3 years. And notice preliminary. Yet, if I heard you correctly, the district said that they're already doing some testing in wetlands, which seems to mean that my speculation that they do actually have a pretty good idea where some of the wetlands are might be correct. And as far as shorter distance, maybe they're talking about doing some wetlands on the east side of Trail Ridge in the St. John's Basin. Okay, and if they're going to do that, why not do them all over there? Though, of course, just putting the wetlands in the St. John's Basin doesn't solve the problem because it goes into the same aquifer. Well, you know, maybe you could argue that maybe it does, because with Jacksonville withdrawing water, it will pull the water towards Jacksonville and not towards the Suwannee Basin. But I don't know if we want to depend on that. So we have many, many questions and not many answers. And from what you're saying, Rick, even the few things that they do seem to know, like shorter distance pipes, which would seem to imply wetlands closer to Jacksonville, They're not willing to divulge that information. Why is a public project allegedly for the benefit of public rivers and springs under such secrecy? Why is it proceeding with so many open questions that really need answers? That's what I'm not happy with. If somebody wants to, dissuade me from this opinion, feel free. Give it a try. If you have a similar opinion, please be asking such questions to all the appointed and elected officials you can think of. The more people who ask the questions, the more pressure for them to come up with answers or maybe just stop this project. Cross Florida Barge Canal, golf courses and parks, they didn't happen because of public pressure. This could be the same. All right, well, we're more than 20 minutes over our hour.
Yeah. We will have this video up on YouTube in a few days. If you guys don't mind, share it with your friends. That way we can get the word out.
Oh, and the obligatory, we all hope that you'll all become members of WALS if you're not already, because we're a tiny little 501c3. We need a tiny little bit of income to do what we do.
Yep.
And members give us standing in case there ever needs to be legal action. So, Sarah, you want to wrap it up?
We don't have any other questions. Oh, there's one in the chat. Let me pull that up.
It's
Oh.
Fanny.
Thank you.
Fanny, I'm disappointed you didn't ask any questions. Oh, well, guess we're done.
All right. Well, thank you guys for coming, and we'll see you on the next one.
Bye, y'all. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, y'all take care.